Alright, so this fourth installment of my videos on the Progressive Era will take a brief look at the features of Progressivism. This will have us looking at democracy, efficiency, social justice, and then with antitrust legislation, even though it's the fourth feature of progressivism, I'm really going to focus, when we look at on antitrust legislation, I'll focus more on that when we look at Theodore Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. So let's first look at the feature of democracy during the progressive era. So, kind of going on the last video where we left off. Lincoln Steffens, the muckraker who wrote The Shame of the Cities, attacking corruption at the municipal level with political machines. A lot of these progressives at the local and state levels started to focus on cleaning up the government. They believe that too many elected officials did the bidding of corporations rather than serving the interests of all the people. And so their reforms, or the political reforms that we'll talk about momentarily, are really aimed at increasing or promoting democratization of the government and increasing and encouraging greater political participation among the people. No political reform increased political participation among the masses more so than the direct primary. The direct primary now allowed citizens and voters to decide on a candidate within the political party who would run as their nominee in the general election, rather than the traditional method where a small group of people or an inner circle got together and they were the ones that decided who the candidate would be for that political party, for that office, for the general election. You could equate this to with Andrew Jackson and the death of King Caucus. Now you have these nominating conventions. The direct primary is just going to take that spirit of the death of King Caucus or the Jacksonian age and place it on a wider scale, where once again you're increasing democracy, you're increasing political participation among the citizens. Some other political reforms that we'll see during the progressive era that will give citizens a more of a voice and more participation in the political process. The initiative, when citizens can initiate legislation. A referendum. A referendum is when the legislators will allow the citizens to decide whether a bill becomes a law or not. You could think about the Amendment 1 issue that we had with the North Carolina Constitution a couple years back. That was a referendum. The recall elections. Recall elections are when citizens can vote on whether or not they want to end somebody's term in office before their term is actually officially up. Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor of California during a recall election. And then most recently, somebody that's been in the news for the Republicans, Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin, he recently, within the last year or so, survived a recall election there. The Australian, or the secret ballot. The secret ballot is now, kind of common to us, where your vote is confidential. Before, political machines, political bosses could influence how people voted, because a lot of times you would have a write-in, vote, you would have a voice vote, or it was out there in the open. Somehow, some way, people were able to find out who you were voting for. And then finally, the direct election of senators. Before the 17th Amendment, and before it was the 17th Amendment was ratified in 1913. Before that, the state legislators, they were the ones in deciding who would be their two senators for their state. So these political reforms, are happening at the local and state levels, and they're focusing on cleaning up governments, and they're focusing on giving more power to the people and to the citizens of their state or of their city, and taking away some of the power that the political machines and the corporations had previously had. Second major theme of the progressive era was the gospel of efficiency. In the business world during the early 20th century, Frederick W. Taylor wrote a book called The Principles of Scientific Management. And in that, he's going to be deemed or dubbed the efficiency expert with his idea of Taylorism or scientific industrial management. Taylor or Taylorism promises to reduce waste. They promise to reduce inefficiency in the workplace through the scientific analysis of the labor process. You're breaking down the production of goods into these steps, and you're studying the time that it took each worker to perform a task. Taylor then says this is the optimum technique for the worker, and established detailed performance standards for each job classification. You can think of Taylorism or scientific management as a predecessor to the assembly line method that Ford is going to use when he's rolling out his automobiles in the 1920s. In the government, the efficiency movement demanded the reorganization of government agencies to eliminate things being redundant. They want to establish clear lines of authority and to assign responsibility and accountability to specific officials, and they're going to do this or they have two ideas for making municipal government more efficient. One is going to be the commission system, and then later on we'll look at the city manager plan. The commission system was first adopted in Galveston, Texas in 1901 following a devastating hurricane and tidal wave, and there the local government completely collapsed in the aftermath of this hurricane. And so what they did is they decided to come up with a commission system to replace this form of local government. And in the commission system, you have ultimate authority is placed in a board composed of elected administrative heads of city departments. You have the city department head of sanitation, police, utilities, and so on. And therefore, one person has clear authority and accountability for focusing on that area of the city government. The more durable plan will be the city manager plan, under which one professional administrator ran the municipal government in accordance with policies set by the elected council and the mayor. This was first set up in a city in Virginia in 1908. And then by 1914, the National Association of City Managers had heralded the arrival of this new profession. So going along the same lines of efficiency in government, by the early 20th century, these many complex functions of government and business had come to require specialists with technical expertise. Woodrow Wilson wrote that these progressive ideas that we've been talking about in the previous videos could only be achieved if government at all levels, local, state, and national, was informed and administered by experts. And so this principle of government by nonpartisan experts was also promoted by the progressive governor of Robert Lafayette of Wisconsin. Robert Lafayette established the Legislative Reference Bureau to provide elected officials with research, advice, and help when they're going through the process of drafting legislation, coming up with bills, and so on. This is known as the Wisconsin idea. When you have this idea of efficient and more scientific government, at the state and the local level, giving those elected officials the help and the information they need to make effective and informed decisions when dealing with legislation and other bills on the political agenda. This Wisconsin idea was widely publicized and was also copied. Lafayette, is also he's going to be known as Fighting Bob. He's going to be one of these major faces of the progressive movement as far as politicians are involved. As far as politicians go, Lafayette in Wisconsin is also going to push for other reforms such as the direct primary, stronger railroad regulation, the conservation of natural resources, the workmen's compensation program, and this compensation program supports injured laborers who got hurt on the job. And so Wisconsin is known as a laboratory of democracy. democracy, this Wisconsin idea. At the state level, they were really the forerunners, led by Robert Lafayette, as far as pushing these political reforms through. That we talk about, being a hallmark or being an important feature of the progressive era. The last feature that we want to focus on of the progressive era for this video will be social justice. And social justice promoted greater social justice through the creation of nonprofit organizations and charities and associations. And we discussed this briefly with the Women's Christian Temperance Union. But within time, it became apparent that these social evils extended beyond the reach of private charities and grassroots organizations, and they demanded government intervention, which kind of, once again, it goes along with this line or this idea that the government was going to be the vehicle for human welfare, for the improvement of human welfare in America. And so you started to see these grassroots organizations demanding government intervention, and they're doing this particularly in the field of labor legislation. Labor legislation is perhaps the most significant reform to emerge from the drive of progressive social justice. It emerges first at the state level. The National Child Labor Committee, for instance, was organized in 1904, and this led this movement for laws prohibiting the employment of young children. And then within years, after through the creation of this National Child Labor Committee, you had state and local committees having graphic documentation of the evils of child labor, and this is helped by photographers, and this committee is going to start pushing through legislation in a lot of states, banning the labor of underage children, and limiting the number of hours that older children can work. Closely linked to the child labor reform movement was a concerted effort to regulate the hours of work for women. And this is going to be spearheaded by a woman named Florence Kelley, who is the head of the National Consumers League. And Florence Kelley and the National Consumers League, they wanted to promote state laws to regulate the long working hours imposed on women who were wives and mothers. So you did see a lot of the states outlaw night work and labor and dangerous occupations for women and children. However, with the Supreme Court, they pursued a very curious path when dealing with these state labor laws. Just a couple examples here. Lochner versus New York in 1905, the Supreme Court voided a 10-hour workday because they said that these workday limits actually violated what's called the liberty of contract for the workers. The liberty of contract is the idea that the worker can work any job they want, no matter how long or how bad the occupation is. In another court case in 1908, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a 10-hour workday for women because the prosecutor brought some sociological data to the Supreme Court's attention that said that the effects of long hours had a negative, or the effects of long hours for women were negative in terms of the women's health and their morals. So the Supreme Court went back and forth. Legislation to protect workers against avoidable accidents also gained momentum with such incidents as the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire that happened in March of 1911 in New York City. In short, a fire broke out in this factory, and the owner of the factory had locked the doors to prevent theft. And so the women were trapped in this 10-story building. In the upper 3 floors, they were trapped there, and they had no choice but to either jump out and fall to their death or be burned alive inside the building. And so 146 out of 850 women, most of them were teens, and almost all of them were immigrants, died in that fire. And this brought a state commission to investigate the fire, and 36 new city and state laws and regulations were implemented, which were copied among other states around the nation. And so we did see some legislation being brought up on the state level to help out labor, either through activism in a grassroots level or through accidents and disasters like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire.